Excellent. This is indeed on. Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to the Anti-Abuse Working Group. It's a Tuesday afternoon. Yes, we are having working group sessions. This is not a drill. And, you know, it's not a dress policy up first. Mwahahaha. So I am Brian Nisbet, and along with the two other co-chairs, Tobias Knecht and Marcus de Bruin, we wish to bring you this edition of the Anti-Abuse Working Group. We have made some changes to the agenda. We'll talk about that in a moment. So just to remind people that you are live on the internet, as is all of RIPE. We have Steno, wonderful, wonderful Steno, not, as somebody accused earlier, an AI. No AI could do what our wonderful Steno people do. Meet Echo is there also for questions and answers. And as said, there is a live stream. If you are asking a question, either in text or in voice, and if you're in the room, please do so in voice for preference. And then please state your name and affiliation, and also do the same on Meet Echo. And obviously, as a RIPE community event, this is covered by the Code of Conduct. There is the ability to rate things where appropriate. If you wish to do so on the RIPE 88 website. We do like feedback, either on that or verbally, which will all be good. So I'm just going to mention, I'm going to change things around, just a whole changing things around. In relation to the agenda, we have moved the presentations to the beginning of the session to allow more freedom, how much time we're going to need, but allow more freedom in relation to the discussion about the potential rechartering and things like that, because I don't want to be sitting there going, are we still leaving our speakers enough time? That's very unfair, so we're not going to do that. So just to let you know of that. The minutes from RIPE 87 were circulated. I think we're all good. If anybody has anything they would like to talk about now, then now is a good time to do so. If not, we will consider the minutes accepted, in which case we will. So the final bit of administrivia is the working group co-chair selection process. And given it is about me, I'm going to step away from this and let Marcus take over.
Yeah, we had a call for nominations for a new working group chair, or because Brian's term has or is ending at this meeting. We had one nomination, which was Brian, and we asked if there is still support for Brian or any objections, and we received some support and none objections. So unless there is something you'd like to voice now, I would like to welcome Brian back as a co-chair for another 3-year term. So thank you, Brian. And we do have a comment.
Yeah, thank you, Marcus. And Jim Reid here is a professional troublemaker. All I want to say at this stage is I'm glad to see that Brian's being reappointed, but I wonder what the process you have here for term limits, because I think it's important we have a healthy but sensible turnover in the leadership of working groups. So do you have term limits on the number of times that people like yourself, Brian and Tobias can serve as co-chairs of the working group?
Yeah, and we do not have term limits defined, but Brian is speaking up.
Yeah, no, we don't at the moment. This is an active conversation, I think, across a lot of working groups. I know that Miriam is talking to people about looking at the selection processes and things like that. Speaking purely personally, it's a really funny one, because I agree completely with the healthy turnover, and I've been here a while. It's not like we have a long queue of people putting their hand up about these things as well. So it's a balance, but it's absolutely something that I think we're aware of, and it's something that is a community across the whole thing. And this is not to take away from the fact that we need to do it too.
Yeah.
this is something we need to work on.
Yeah, if I remember back in the days when I was doing the DNS working group, the then co-chairs all said we are going to stand down, and we gave the working group effectively 3 years notice in order to do a succession plan. So maybe something along those lines might be useful at some point here, but how you decide to do that is entirely up to you. And I know that you and all the rest of your colleagues have got sensible head on your shoulders and will do the right thing.
We got that quote, yeah? No, cool. Thank you, Jim.
Just following on with the, Fergus Mackay, Flex Optics, individual as well. Ex-working group chair as well in the past. The pressure for people to not stand up if people aren't being pushed sideways or there's an obvious vacancy. I think just because nobody is standing up doesn't mean people aren't thinking about it, but there's no, you're going to have to stand up and be criticized publicly if you stand up, are we going to vote for this person? So for EIX working group, we always used to have single transferable votes. And Rob used to tell me off for doing this because why do we need that? And the point is, it lets you have people standing up, they can vote. And if they do really badly, it's okay. Nobody need know that they did really badly. And we would have 3 or 4 people standing because we had a process that enabled change to happen in a way that you weren't left standing. Nobody liked me on the list because they all said they liked Brian more. Because it does become a popularity contest in this community. I'm sorry to say, but the PC is the same in my opinion. So I would urge strongly that you have people stepping out of the way, with whether it's term limits or individually, but also do something like secret STV voting so that people can express an opinion, and preferably ranked in private without this yeah, I think Brian's great, and Brian is great, but who else are we missing? So anyway, it's just my sense.
Okay. Thank you. It's noted.
I mean, I think I absolutely, I will say that again, for this working group and forever, we have, not forever, but for the last, I think probably 6 years, that we don't announce who is stepping forward until the end of the nominations phase, which is an attempt to go, well, to not say that Brian is running again or Tobias or Marcus is running again, to encourage other people to put their hand up, which is a step, but there are doubtless more steps we can take. Yeah, no, I mean,
it's the public voting that is the problem. You can't, I can't say actually I think he's better or I'm not sure or whatever. It needs to be a private vote if we're going to have democracy. But Jim's going to disagree with me, I hope.
Jim Reid, just back again for a bit to throw in another little piece of troublemaking. I kind of agree and disagree with what Fergus has said, but the point I just want to make is this is ripe. We decide things by consensus, we don't vote.
So moving swiftly along.
The thing is, Folk, the thing is talking about voting and privacy and so on. It's really hard to do consensus with complete privacy.
I mean, I think the acknowledgement is this is a continuous process. Yeah. as we improve our ability to bring more and more people into the community, and I think we're better than we were, but we still have absolutely a ways to go, both specifically for this working group and for the community as a whole. So cool.
Hi, Malcolm Hussey, concerned citizen, just making a bit of trouble by disagreeing with my good friend Jim on one small point there about the voting thing. I see no problem with voting for a position like this. The reason why we say that Right doesn't do voting is because we believe in the rough consensus process, but that's applicable to policy. because in policy, it's important that the policy to be supported and have legitimacy, have the general support of the community behind it, and not to have substantial reasons why this shouldn't be done, because that's that are meant by a significant part of the community. That undermines the legitimacy of it being said to be a view of the whole community rather than just a part of it, because the community has no right to vote a policy in imposition on another part of it. But when it's the working group, these considerations don't apply. The idea of, well, we've got two good candidates here, we've got to pick one or the other, saying actually there is no consensus here, so we won't do anything, is not the right thing to do in that, whereas it would be in a disagreement over policy. So the rough consensus thing applies to the policy situation. It doesn't necessarily have to apply to internal administrative matters like selecting the chair of a working group. Thank you.
I will just remind people that the working group chair selection process for this working group is, if the working group cannot reach consensus, we have a vote. So it is, part of this is already here as a piece. But anyway, I think, shall we?
Yeah, okay. So finalize the agenda. We used to have 3 presentations, interactions, but one presenter is unable to present today, so we are left with 2. And first up is Maria from RIPE NCC, talking about illegal content from a RIR's perspective.
Hello, everyone. My name is Maria Stafyla. I'm a senior legal counsel at the RIPE NCC, and I'm here to present on what is our role as a regional internet registry in removing illegal content that is online. Our goal here is to inform the community on conversations we are having on what the RIPE NCC can do to remove content that is online. We have been having this conversation with various stakeholders, and it related to different types of illegal content. For example, child sexual abuse material, the unauthorized distribution of sports and other live events, in other words, piracy. And for the purpose of this presentation, just for clarification, we are not referring to third-party content that is hosted by us, for which we do qualify as a hosting provider under the Digital Services Act, and therefore the obligations apply to us. Especially about piracy, there are ongoing discussions that are happening at the EU level on how to combat the piracy of sports and other live events in an effective manner. The European Commission has issued a recommendation in this regard, and at the moment, together with European Intellectual Property Office, they are monitoring the effectiveness of this recommendation in order to judge later on whether there are further legislative changes that are needed in this regard. Amid those discussions, there have been comments expressed that more obligations should be placed on the RIPE NCC as a regional internet registry during our KYC processes. So what is our view in this matter? So far, our response to this kind of conversations and questions is that, of course, we engage with the stakeholders, we hear their issue, and we explain from our point of view what is our role as an RIR, how to use the RIPE database in order to identify the relevant holder, what are our onboarding processes, and under what conditions we may take actions against them and against the resources they are holding, what the effects of taking actions against the resources would be, and why such an action from our point of view would be disproportionate and not effective in removing the illegal content from being online. To dive further into each of the topics, so what is our role as an RIR? We are registering internet number resources to our members, and we are maintaining the RIPE registry. Members then choose how to use the resources to further allocate them to their customers or their own network. However, this must be in line with the RIPE policies and the RIPE NCC procedures. And further than that, we do not have responsibility or control how the resources are being used. We help the interested stakeholders how to use the RIPE database in order to identify the the relevant holder and how to use and interpret the information that is shown there. We also point them to the RIPE-NCC contact form where they can that can be used in order to report incorrect information in the RIPE database. And accordingly, we follow up with our standard procedures in this regard. With regards to our onboarding processes, before we sign a new agreement with a new member, we do various due diligence checks. So we verify that they exist, we verify their identity, that they are properly represented in the signing of the agreement. And if a member is later found to be in violation of their contractual obligations, including the RIPE policies and the RIPE-NCC procedures, we have the right to take actions against them and the resources they hold. At the moment, there is no RIPE policy that is describing for what kind of content the resources that we distribute may be used. However, if we receive a legally binding order that is obliging us to take actions against our members, we will comply with it. So we were also asked what the effect of deregistering internet number resources from where illegal content is coming from would be in this regard. And our response to that is that the content would not be directly removed or might not be impacted at all, because routing decisions are not our responsibility. It is for the network operators. We do not provide connectivity. Also, removing an entire block of IP addresses from where the illegal content is originating would affect all the users that are supported by the networks that are running from these from the entire range of IP addresses. So from our point of view, this would be excessive and not proportionate to the desired outcome. So our next steps here is that we will keep following We will keep following the relevant developments, and we will keep engaging with the relevant stakeholders to raise awareness and help with explaining what is our role as a regional internet registry. And with that, any questions?
Yes, one simple one.
Where are you?
Putty,
There we go. Cool.
London Internet Exchange links. You put on your slide there that if you're faced with a legally binding court order against one, to take action against one of the resource holders or against their resources, you naturally comply. This, of course, is you have no choice but that. However, I'd understood that it was previously the committed policy of the NCC that you would take every opportunity to resist such a court order being made. That is, if you were faced with essentially an ex parte order, a notice of a motion to make such an ex parte order or something, you would ask to oppose that order and make representations to the court with reasons why that should not be made, and this was not the appropriate action to take against content. Is that a correct understanding, and does that remain the policy and practice of the legal department?
Of course, we would examine each case on its own merits, and accordingly we would decide what are the next steps. But if we are legally obliged to comply with it, perhaps we would evaluate all our legal options at the same time and in which order its actions should be taken.
Sure. Once a court order is final, there can be nothing to do but comply. My question was only addressed to before that. You can be neutral on whether such a court order is made, or you can actually take every lawful opportunity to persuade the court that it should not be made. That was where I was addressing the question.
So your question is if we would be challenging this?
Yes.
I believe if we had if we thought that there are reasons to do it, I believe that we would.
Thank you.
Please.
Hello, Robert Carolina, General Counsel with ISC. In an earlier talk today, it was interesting because we heard somebody explaining how addresses that are registered with regional internet registries eventually end up clearly being used in many different regions around the world. So I'm wondering how, if at all, does your policy differ if the request or indeed the demand comes from a legal authority completely outside the European or Middle Eastern region? What if it comes from so far afield that there's no realistic chance of the requesting authority having legal jurisdiction over RIPE?
At the moment, we take actions against our members and the resources if we are, apart from the cases that they might be violating their contractual obligations, but we take actions upon legally binding orders. So they would have to go through the course of recognizing a foreign court decision in order to come against us.
So there you're, forgive me for the follow-up, just you're speaking there of what, civil enforcement or some other type of international enforcement of a judgment entered in a foreign court?
Correct.
Thank you.
So Hans-Petter Holen, Managing Director of the RIPE NCC, I find it good that we have legal colleagues asking legal questions here, but bear in mind that some of these questions also have political implications. So I do like the first response from Maria best. We will evaluate this on a case-by-case basis because it's very difficult to give very tabloid answers to how we will in principle treat any case in this area. Of course, our primary objective is to keep an accurate registry and using the registry to take action against nation states, organizations for political means or other means is something that the board has stated clearly that we do not want to. Right? When it comes to breaking the laws for individual organizations, well, as clearly said, we have to follow Dutch law and follow valid court orders. However, we will hope that or trust that courts actually make educated decisions, right? So it's a delicate balance here, and if you ask hypothetically how we would treat a case and you create the worst possible court order possible, you know, I don't think it makes sense to discuss that. But, you know, in principle, we want an accurate registry of who has the registered right to use the addresses, and trust that the courts won't make that life too hard for us.
Please.
Alex Diode, legal counsel for AMSIX. It's my understanding that you would only abide by valid Dutch court orders or foreign court orders that have been transposed by Dutch court.
As long as it is a legally binding order to us, we have the obligation to comply.
So if it's a valid Russian court order, you will comply?
Sorry, could you repeat?
If it's a valid legal Russian court order, you will comply?
It will have to be recognized in the Netherlands.
It has to be recognized. Yeah, okay. That was my question.
Yes. Okay. Cool. Thank you very much, Maria. So next up, if we can, yes, indeed. So we have Yury, the slides up. So who's going to talk to us about UTRS? Please take it away.
Hello, everyone. Oh, sorry. Hello, everyone. So I'm happy to be here. So my name is Yury Zhauniarovich, and actually I represent Delft University of Technology. And this is my first attendance of the RIPE meeting, so I'm happy to be here. My background in cybersecurity. But today I will talk about combination of network measurements and cybersecurity. And in particular, we will talk about the use of UTRS for combating DDoS attacks. And this work is, I think we need to applaud to Radu because he actually introduced me to this area. This work we did together with our collaborators from Yokohama National University. Okay, so usually, like, I presented this work once on the cybersecurity conference, and so my question was, like, how many people in the audience know what is BGP? So I just want to see the hands. Okay, so much better representative. Now the second question, what about RTBH? Okay, very good one. And final question, what about UTRS? So pretty good. So yeah, so just for those who does not know, so RTBH, it's a remotely triggered black hole. So basically this is the extension to BDP protocol that allows the autonomous system to notify about the IPs that are under attack, and then the other peers should start blocking the traffic going to this IP address, and basically redirect this to this nice picture of the black hole. So this is where your traffic goes when you use RTBH. And there is a community-run unwanted traffic removal service. So this is basically the RTBH that is run by trusted third party, Team Camry, in this case. It's what is nice, it's global, it's free, and it's pretty easy to join. So today I would like to understand and to show you a little bit of the background. So imagine that you have a very simple internet consisting of 4 autonomous systems. Basically 2 of these autonomous systems, 1 and 2 and 3, are members of this UTRS service. So basically they fulfilled the requirements and joined this UTRS service. So in case of the host experiencing the attack from all over the internet, the autonomous system 1 can notify to the UTRS service that this host is under attack, and will ask all the members to start blocking the traffic to this host. So this is basically what is about RTBH and UTRS in particular. So we started with this nice service, and we wanted to understand, so how many members are there, and how many members I use this service to mitigate the DDoS attacks, and to what extent DDoS attacks trigger the notifications of in this UTRS service, and how many of these attacks can or announcement for UTRS can be explained with amplification and IoT-based DDoS attacks. So for answering these questions, we collected 3 data sets, basically UTRS dataset, MPOT dataset, and IoT Milker dataset. So UTRS dataset, we created our own autonomous system, and we became a member of UTRS service. So upon doing this, we started to get notification about all announcement, BGP announcement, to start blocking particular traffic. MPOT dataset, I don't know, like anyone knows what is MPOT? Okay, only 1, 2 hands. So MPOT, this is basically an amplification honeypot. So this honeypot pretends to be the amplifier in the internet, like, I don't know, DNS resolver, public DNS resolver, for instance. Upon receiving the request to start a reflection DDoS attack, it collects the information but does not run the DDoS attack. So it's like pretty ethical participation in the attack in order to collect the information about ongoing DDoS attacks. Yokohama University, they have like sensors, MPOT sensors all over the world. So like they deployed more than over 50 sensors, and that's how they collect the data from different points in the internet and combine them together. And this data set, what we used. And the third data set, it's IoT Milker. So this is the piece of code that pretends to be a bot of the IoT botnet. So like Mirai, so you know Mirai botnet, and this piece of code receives the notifications from command and control service about starting the DDoS attack to particular IP address and for how long this attack should run. So Mirai botnet has like this specific type of the command. Like what are the findings for our UTRS dataset? So we found out that UTRS service is not really widely used. So we measured, we collected the data in the end of 2022, beginning of 2023, and we find out that during this 6 months, so on average, there were like 3,122 announcements using this service, to 700, maximum 776 targets per day. So targets, it's the network, subnetwork. Usually this is just IP address, as I will show later. So there is a sparse coverage. So the majority of the UTRS announcements are targeting individual IP addresses. And within this 6-month measurements, we found out that only 2 entries target the same 20/27 network within 1 day. So apparently there was a pretty huge attack to whole subnetwork, and they decided to advertise this subnetwork in order to stop this attack. And we found out that there is not a huge conversion, so only 122 autonomous systems during this 6 months, they made the announcement to UTRS service. Team Camry reports on the website that they have like more than 1,200 members. So yeah, it's like 10%. We see only 10% of people or of autonomous systems who actively announce services to the service, the IPs, to stop the attacks. And we also observed that majority of the attacks like have short duration. So 21% of them, they have like 5 minutes and less. And this is partially due to our, I would say, way of collecting the UTRS data set. So we observed that in the past, the service was not very stable. And instead of like collecting all the announcements ourselves, we were making every 5 minutes the snapshot of the BGP table in order to collect. And this is partially the attribute of our, so this means that we probably missed some of the attacks, short attacks. And the longest attack was like 4 days, 18 hours and 55 minutes. What we did next, so we decided to find the intersection between the attacks that are measured by the MPOT or IoT and the UTRS announcement, the corresponding to the UTRS announcement. And we tried to find the exact intersection. So like when the attack and when the announcement have like the exact intersection. And we also, as in the previous paper by Matthijs Jonker, we also extended the UTRS announcement by 12 hours in the beginning and 12 hours in the end, and tried to find the intersection between them. And we found that there is very small amount of the entries which we observed. So for intersection between the UTRS MPOT with exact interval intersection, we find out that there are only 468 entries for the 6 months of our dataset. So pretty low number. And for UTRS Milker, it's even lower, like 9, and for offset intersection, so it's like 791. And the number of unique autonomous systems were also pretty low, so it's like only 25 and 2 correspondingly. So we also observed that there is a low percentage of DDoS attacks on the UTRS member that trigger mitigation. So if you imagine that I'm the autonomous system, I see all the attacks coming to me. Only 1% of all the amplification attacks like triggered the announcement, like and only 0.06 attacks for IoT, they triggered the announcement of the UTRS. So we think that maybe other attacks were not that strong, so that's why they didn't trigger the owners of autonomous system to notify UTRS about these attacks. This is our explanation. And we also try to understand if we are like kind of measuring correctly the things, and we try to find what are the factors that contribute to the attacks being announced for the UTRS to be blocked. And we found out that 2 factors are duration and the number of packets. So with duration, it's obvious. So like the longer the attack, it usually starts, the autonomous system starts to trigger the announcement to UTRS, and the larger or the heavier the attack, it also triggers the announcement. So what are the conclusions? So we know that there are like around 75,000 of autonomous systems, and only 1%, roughly 1% of them are members of the UTRS. And out of this 1% of the all autonomous system assigned in the world, so only 124 autonomous systems use the service to drive the announcements. There are not that many announcements per day, which I was frankly surprised, like on 776 targets. So like knowing that there are many attacks happening during the day, DDoS attacks, this is pretty low number for me. And we figure out that for members who participate in UTRS, there is only small percent, like very small percent of the attacks that trigger the announcement for the UTRS. So service is nice, but nobody seems to use it. So thank you very much.
Cool, thank you. I'm gonna interrupt briefly. Any idea why? I mean, does Team Cymru made any comment on this, or?
That's a very good question. So one rumor, I would say, so the service was in the past not that stable, first. Second thing, so they only 2 years ago, they introduced BGP flow spec. So before they were using only like block by IP, so like the whole traffic to IP address, and this is pretty heavy solution. So with BGP flow spec, I expect that people will start use it more. Yeah, and of course, a lot of just autonomous systems, they have like their RTBH own solutions from the upstreams. And of course, upstreams, because they charge fees for this service, they don't have incentive to use this global and free service. Also, maybe they attribute that this is a company. So if maybe this service would be run by the community, this maybe will drive more participants.
Please.
Who
are you?
Rüdiger Volk, before retirement, quarter of a century running internet for Deutsche Telekom. I used to be very skeptical about the black holing, because, well, okay, your first line on that slide says free, global, low effort to join, and requires a lot of trust. And kind of the security implementations for making sure that the black hole announcements are kind of clean and legit are really challenging. Two remarks to your questions. Well, what you have measured is which of the service, well, okay, there is a number of service members, and I assume service members includes ASs that are organized to send signals, but much more important, that will use the signals to actually effect the blocking. And yes, the world would be really bad if you had 100% of the people who are willing to use the signal, if they actually report, oh, we are under attack. Only 10% of the members are kind of using the service for getting protection. the question of how many of the members who are receiving the signals, who are actually implementing the blackholing, seems to be unknown.
I have comment on this, but yes.
Yeah, well, okay, kind of taking
Please do, because
Yes.
is there a question or what are we,
Yeah.
you know?
So yes, from like Team Cambria, of course, does not disclose the members. But we have the follow-up paper on this that will be presented in 2 weeks on Sigmetrics, and I also submitted the short talk for a lightning talk for Friday in order to explain how many and how we identified the members who actually abide to the blockings. So we also know this number ourselves.
Okay, so that is kind of the research question that seemed to be open for me. So let me just ask: is it a high or a low percentage?
So it's like around we are sure with about 600 autonomous systems that they actively block the traffic.
Okay, so that is kind of medium range, I'd say.
Yes.
Sorry, Rüdiger, we are going to have to.
Yeah,
move through.
another remark on this is that, of course, these days, not everybody, and that also explains some of what you have seen in the measurements, that first of all, the blackholing actually completes the denial of service that it tries to protect from. And well, okay, what it actually protects from is kind of the side effects of the targeted attack. Of course, these days, there are ways for, if you are under attack, you divert your traffic through devices that kind of sort out what is really attack and what is good signal that can go through. And quite obviously, people who are protecting their networks and services with this kind of mechanisms will not issue a UTRS signal when something happens, unless there is an attack that is so hard that their regular protections do not work.
Yeah, completely agree with you on this.
Cool. Yes.
Malcolm Hadley from Links. Quick question on your data retention policy. Source IP addresses for attack traffic. Do you ever capture them? And if so, how long do you keep it for and for what purposes? And when do you get rid of it?
Really good question. So the source IP addresses that were under the attack?
Source IP addresses of attack traffic.
So this one we call, sources addresses we didn't collect. We collected the targets who were the victims of the attacks. Because
I'm talking about the people whose machines are compromised that are issuing DDoS traffic. Do you collect the IP addresses of those machines? No. Not at any stage at all?
Because this is spoofed traffic.
I understand that. I was just asking the question.
Okay. No other questions. I don't see any online. So, no, listen, thank you very much, Yury.
Thank you.
So, actually, can we stop the timer thing? There are no time limits. We are, a large part of the agenda items that we had are in relation to the proposed, sorry, if you're going to have a conversation, yeah, no, thank you. Is around in relation to the proposed potential recharter. Folks, seriously, please, if you're going to have a conversation, can you please leave the room? Guys, we can hear you talking. Please stop or leave. Thank you. If I can hear you, so can everybody else. Okay, so proposed potential recharter. And what we have here is we have the objective and we have some of the scope, and we've made some small edits to this. We want to talk about this. We did put it out on the mailing list. We got some feedback there, which Marcus is going to, surrounded by Germans. Marcus is going to go through now. And then, we're happy to have the conversation here in the room. We have some ideas and we'll talk through that. So is it best to go through this first and then talk about the mailing list reaction, do you reckon? Or, yeah, cool. So, I hate reading slides out, but I'm going to. They're brief. So what we were talking about, again, we talked about this in Rome. We feel that the working group itself may require a change. And there's a bunch of reasons for this. The largest one of which is the world. The world has moved. There are some people in this room who were in the room who rechartered from anti-spam to anti-abuse. And we had very good reasons for that. And we feel we have good reasons now to propose this to the working group. Companies really, yes, people are talking about abuse, absolutely. But what people are mostly talking about is the wider area of security, cybersecurity, whatever you want to talk about. And we know that we've had topics over the years which have been in that area and have not been really network abuse or infrastructure abuse. And we think that the RIPE community probably needs to be talking about this very clearly, and they are in different working groups, but also to be seen to do that. And there's some other pieces we want to talk about and reinvigorate. So the idea there is, as we said, Security Working Group is committed to fostering collaboration, sharing best practices, and addressing security challenges within the RIPE community. Primary objective of the working group is to enhance the security, resilience, and stability of the internet infrastructure within our region. Tackling abuse of internet infrastructure and resources would remain a goal of the working group. And then we have the scope piece that we have there. So identifying and analyzing emerging security threats and vulnerabilities affecting internet infrastructure, collaborating with stakeholders to develop and advocate for best practices, guidelines, and standards for securing internet resources, facilitating information sharing and cooperation amongst network operators, law enforcement, the RIPE NCC, and relevant entities to mitigate security risks, providing education, training, and outreach initiatives to raise awareness of security issues and promote best practice adoption, and develop policies and best practices to improve security and response to security incidents and abuse issues. So there's a through line there from where we are now, but to move on from that, and very importantly, make the reference to the people who are being victimized either as the recipients of an attack or because their infrastructure is the piece being abused or whatever else. So as I said, we put this out there. We feel this is the right direction, but obviously we're just the co-chairs. You're the working group. There was some feedback on the mailing list, which I think we'll talk about first, and then we can go into discussion in the room as people feel. So, Marcus.
Yeah, we asked in March, I think it was, that we were intending some change to the working group, and first asked for your feedback then. And there was some feedback that we can also keep the working group as is, but the most popular option was rechartering the working group, although at this point that it was not clear what the rechartering might look like. And there were some comments about, yeah, we should probably focus on things that we can agree on, like best practices, standards, recommendations. And in April, we proposed a rough draft charter, which Brian has just presented to you. I think with there was just one addition in the slides, which is on this slide the term the RIPE NCC. I think this is the only change made to the one that I've sent to the mailing list. And asked for feedback again, and there was indeed some feedback. So most comments were supporting the transition into a security working group. So there was, from our perspective, some positive feedback in this direction. But there was also some comments about the draft charter itself. The main thing was, should we address the RIPE community and a RIPE NCC more explicitly in the charter? And yeah, I think on the it's just one slide. Okay, yeah. I think RIPE community, which is explicitly in the working group objectives, is already addressed, and the RIPE NCC is added now. There was comments on should we state that the working group does make policy, no, it was not policy suggestions, but how do you phrase it? Recommendations towards the RIPE NCC. We feel we do not need to make this explicit because yeah, if the working group does want to have an effect on the RIPE NCC, the way to go is make a policy proposal, reach consensus, and yeah. So we
felt there were some things that were implicit in the nature of a working group in the RIPE community that we didn't feel the need to spell out completely.
So yeah, we would like to hear more. Do you feel that the charter as it is now is a good one? Would you like to see some changes? Is the wording okay? How do you feel about this in general? Eric, please go ahead.
Erik Boyce, speaking for myself. I find the name RIPE Secret Working Group a bit of
secret. No.
I'm a bit dyslexic, and I was very confused when I saw it. I thought, oh, that's not correct, but it's not Friday yet, and so I thought it was a bit misleading there, and I thought, oh, this is interesting. So I just wanted to point it out as a first glance.
I mean, to be fair, I did make that joke earlier today as well. So.
Rüdiger Volk once more. First, a short remark. Well, okay, the overall theory of RIPE and RIPE NCC is that the RIPE community, RIPE, provides guidelines to the NCC in one form or the other. So that's not kind of something that needs very explicit regulation. The thing that is fairly specific, where I'm kind of wondering where we are going, is if there are already established activities in other working groups or elsewhere in RIPE that are traditionally tackling seriously security issues. Well, okay, what's the idea? Take it all over, move RPKI from routing to X abuse. Not quite sure what the intentions are and whether that has been discussed. In the good old times, at the end of the meeting, there was always the topic of input and output with other working groups. Nicely, the routing working group will be later. And yeah, well, okay, what's the idea?
Yeah, fair question. I did mention this in my email to the mailing list. So the idea is not to capture all topics that are related to security, but there is security topics that do not fall into our working groups.
And I think it's fair to say we already have a lot of crossover across the working groups. V6 turns up in address policy, it turns up in V6, it turns up in routing, it turns up everywhere. You know, other things, NC services, there are a bunch of things, but no, this is not any attempt to suddenly take over 50% of the working group slots and work at the meeting. We all have enough to be doing in our spare time.
Malcolm Hutchie from Links. I don't have any opinion on whether or not the scope of where the scope of work should be bounded and so forth. But if the working group wants to adopt a scope like this, my comments would be that the first 4 bullet points on there are well written and seem good to me, if that was what it was intended.
Excuse me, could you repeat that, please?
If a general security scope is wanted from this working group, on which I have no opinion, my comment is that the first 4 bullet points are well written and seem to be clear and well designed for that purpose, for broad purpose. The last bullet point, I would like to sort of develop the line of questioning from that we've just heard. This question of policies does this mean a PDP policy that would be a policy of the right community in that sense? It's one thing to develop best practices. We can develop best practices that we spread around. Anyone comes and they take from them what they will, and if they don't, then that's up to them too. There's no difficulty there. But the word policy, you know, can have much broader, much more significant implications. Is this meant to be a right community policy? Is it meant to be a PDP process type thing that is followed for it? What are the consequences of breaking that policy? What are the enforcement mechanisms? Who is it addressed to? Because actually security issues, the audience for that are potentially much broader than the right community members. Yeah, do they really have any interest, that broader audience have any interest in listening to right policy on matters as broad as this? I think that some significant consideration and scrutiny needs to be given to the question specifically of whether the output should have the status of policy. If it were to drop that as the proposal and it was simply to develop best practices along these lines, then again, passe my lack of opinion on whether we want such a broad scope as this. I would not have any concerns about the rest of it with that dropped. I think it would be unobjectionable as it is. But the word policy, I think, deserves real scrutiny. Thank you.
Yeah, Toby here. I think you're making a good point, but I'm not really 100% understanding how that is different from other working groups. We understand that security is a very broad topic, and it's not the 3 of us that make the decision that a policy that somebody wrote is going to happening, but it's a community effort. So the input from the community is required to make changes to policies, or say we don't want to have that policy because it doesn't make any sense for us, or for whatever reason, technically, politically, whatever. I think that's a community decision, but I do not really understand.
How would I distinguish policy in this area from policy from other working groups? Because basically the right community is the community of people who are most interested in the policies of those other working groups. So the routing policy really represents the policy of people that actually manage routing within this surface area. Yeah? The address policy working group is the people who know the database policy group is the people who are most concerned and impacted by the policies for the database.
Right.
Security, however, because it's got such a broader scope, this is not really the community of people that are affected by these security issues anyway. It's actually a much smaller subset of them. Yeah. But it's actually one that potentially has some leverage effects that create some more stakeholder interests as to whether or not those leverage effects should be used and so forth. So there are many reasons why one might argue that this has less legitimacy in this area than it would in the other working group areas. Yeah, and more opportunity for error as well.
100%. But I would two things. I think the services working group is exactly the same. It impacts more or less most of the people that join RIPE NCC doing their work anyways. The second point that you said is,
but this is about more than the people that join the NCC and more than the people that join the RIPE community. Yeah, the impact of this, as written, is potentially policies that would have knock-on effects to people that have no participation within this community.
Right, but this is exactly the second point that I wanted to make. One of the things that we want to do here is that we want to broaden the scope. That means if we want to broaden the scope, we're hoping, and we hope that in some way we're able to do that, that we'll also broaden the audience and broaden the participation of people that are joining in. And when you're talking about the RIPE community and above and beyond the RIPE community is everybody that wants to join in and be part of the community, the discussion in whatever way. If law enforcement wants to come in and be part of the conversation, they're part of the RIPE community as everybody else is as well. So I think I understand your point, but I'm not really sure if we're overthinking kind of the knock-on effect in a way where we're saying, okay, when we're going and when we're looking at policies, obviously we're going to go by the process. We're going to go by a consensus, rough consensus, and so on and so forth. And we apply the rules that we already have. We're not going to go and say, oh, we're doing our own thing, and it's own rule set. We're deciding on whatever we want to do. It's part of the established rule set that is working for the policies at RIPE NCC and the RIPE community.
Okay.
I just want to add something.
If the success of this depended, and I think it's something the working group should consider, that if the success of that effort that you just described depended on this working group reaching a much substantially enlarged audience with a substantially broader set of interests than it currently represents, then that would be a relevant consideration as whether or not that was likely to be achieved, and therefore whether it would be an appropriate thing for this working group to be done rather than better done somewhere else. Thank you.
So one thing I just want to say there is that I think that it would be very wrong and I understand, again, I do understand the point you're making, that it would be very wrong of a RIPE working group to explicitly say that it is not going to have the possibility of making policy. So, I think that's a very important point, and I would be very much against, while understanding what you're talking about and obviously understanding the scope, and bear in mind we're a working group that has both had some policies that have been passed through, and we've also had policies that haven't, that have not gone and have had other people say no or whatever else. So that is a thing that has happened. But I certainly think that it would be very foolish not just foolish, it's against the nature of, I feel against the nature of a working group to explicitly say no, because then you're just present, eliminating that is I think very much the wrong step, so.
Peter Koch-Dienig. So I was going to say many things that Malcolm already mentioned, but I might be less eloquent. So as a preface, I'd say two things. One is there is a gap to fill, and there is a role for a security working group in a way in this community. So the efforts are well invested, I believe. I believe that most of the points are too ambitious and too broad, unless you have an introductory clause that says that this is in the context of the RIPE community, which is the community gathering around the RIR, and thus, by matter of fact, limited to a set of certain interests. Identifying and analyzing emerging threats, right? This is not a reinvention of FIRST or of any other such communities. That needs to be scoped in a more appropriate way than we can design right here. Then continuing, I'm getting old, I need notes for this. Yeah.
Well, you haven't had to hold your phone out and lift your glasses up yet, so there's hope, there's hope.
come on, this is discrimination, Brian.
I do it all the time.
So collaborating with stakeholders, I guess that's the most important point. And Tobias, you said we need to broaden the scope and broaden the participation. I think we need to narrow the scope and broaden the participation to make sure that we have a dialogue here and a mutual information to avoid education. Well, you used it in a right context, but this dialogue and information about the various communities, like the numbering community here, that subsection of the network operators that are in the numbering space, with whatever flavor of security people we have. That includes law enforcement. I missed, for example, the CSIRTs being explicitly mentioned. That could be added. So that's the, and that is not all of the security community. There's much more than that. But it should be a dialogue forum, if I'm concerned.
Just one question for clarification. When you say narrowing the scope and broadening the audience, are you talking about the existing, or are you talking about the new one?
Both, actually. That narrowing the scope. Well, that's with a preface. With a preface, it might be narrow enough, but this. Again, this is not going to be the next whatever security researcher conference or anything like that. It needs to be here in this particular context. So information sharing around the RIPE NCC, all fine and nice. Education, training, la 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 la, might be. But of course, number 5. If it was on me, I would actually inscribe in the charter that this group is explicitly exempt from proposing policy. And no, this is not a mistake, and this is not usual for working groups to do that, like to do policy. There's address policy, and we've only had a very few others. This group has a history of failure to reach consensus about policy, and it should be a clear signal that this is not an invitation for random people to walk in. And yes, we are all part of the community, la 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 la, but that's a non-starter or meaningless commitment in a way when it comes to who is affected of what's done here. Policies in RIPE working groups only make sense when they are enforceable, and they're only enforceable if they address the RIPE NCC as its function as the secretariat of the community, which is the lesser part, or as the RIR. Coming up with random policies that force, quote, quote, force operators to run their networks in a particular way are non-enforceable here, and therefore are completely senseless. That should be made clear to attract the right people and to manage the expectations for this very necessary broadening of the participation. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Applause and shaking heads. We're just collecting input at this point. So.
Hi. I try to be brief. I think.
Who are you?
Yeah, sure. You know me, Dmytro Kochmanyuk. I'm representing myself, but my employer is Hostmaster UA Ukrainian TLD. I think we have about 50 people in the room. I counted. I think we should use a wider audience for this discussion, and I'm actually supporting the idea of security-focused working group. I just don't think we should recharter anti-abuse. With all respect to anti-abuse, if we do feel that the group kind of reached its plateau, and it happens, right? The group has been closed before. We can easily start a new group, and maybe we should involve the RIPE chair team into this whole group life cycle discussion, I'm not against rechartering, but I just feel that rechartering is changing the focus and, let's say, working items, areas of interest too much. And then there is a little question of the chairs. So if you choose recharter, I think it would be just to reconfirm the chair collective, of the group, just so people with, let's say, security focus who didn't feel like being in a group would now feel like they belong to this as a chair, would have their chance. That can be staggered, of course, to ensure the continuity of work. And one last comment, I would probably agree with the Peter. Stenographers put Piotr. that, yeah, we cannot enforce anything on operators or companies. And also note that this creates at least 2 NCC work items in facilitating information sharing and then in providing education training. I think with the view of the right budget discussions, we should probably kind of think of which group immediate or potential effect on SCC people or time or money budget. And so kind of have this a consideration, because I don't want this to be a tragedy of the commons, you know. They're just an item again for the working group chair collective and for the RIPE chairs to consider. I guess that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I appreciate your work and your initiative.
Hi, Alistair Woodman. I have a clarifying question before I get to my comments. So is any of this change predicated on what the EU is doing related to the Cyber Resiliency Act and other things in that area?
I mean, no is the short answer, albeit things like NIS2, things like the Digital Services Act, all of these things, and the regulation, we spoke a lot about this in Rome, are one of the things where we're like, okay, this regulation is coming. Is there so it's not predicated on, but it's certainly with an awareness of the increased amount of regulation. I know that specifically that I believe has been spoken about in the open source working group. And there's co-op and there's crossovers there, but it's certainly with an awareness of an increased regulatory regime in the EU, which is not the whole service area, but is obviously a significant chunk of it.
So if I could paraphrase that, you're leaning into that assumption that there's going to be more regulatory oversight from the EU?
I think that certainly seems to be the way the world is going. So,
right.
Yeah.
So I think that's relevant to, so then in principle, the way I would read this, if you think you're developing policies, you want to throw your hat in the ring as an industry group that would actually be setting policies that would potentially deal with things at that European level. Is that what you're sort of saying?
I would 100% agree with it. So the European Commission is making their laws or their things, whatever you want to call it, directives and so on and so forth, based on what they know. And at the moment, there's not a lot of feedback coming from the industry itself, because the industry at the moment and over the last years, and Peter was exactly saying that, is not regulating itself very, very well. So policy proposals for things that we're now seeing in DSA have been failing 5 years ago. And so from my perspective, and this is my personal perspective, we have now a chance to more or less be to be part of that process, and also be part of the process that will come from the European Commission and from other legislators. And this is what we want to do. And if we can kind of, I don't want to say influence, but if we can be a partner on that side, on a security, on an anti-abuse, on different places, then I think that's a good thing, because we know exactly what's happening. Otherwise, the Commission will come with something, and I would bet it's not going to be appreciated by a lot of people here if they come with what they think, what they want to come with.
So I would concur with your observation. I think I stand on your side of the situation. I'm pretty sure that I've now added a couple of bits behind here who will want to be on the opposite side. And my colleague over there, I think if you want to have this conversation, there's a desire to look at this as a layer 10, maybe a layer 11 problem space that we're going to be dealing with in the future. And there's possibly stuff that's down at just the tactical operational stuff. And I hear from you that you think you want to be playing in the big league. And some of the folks here are potentially not comfortable with that idea. I do agree with your thesis that if somebody doesn't step in, there will be a vacuum left there. And at the moment, I've been on calls with the European Commission and other folks. They want to go talk to Sensenilec and other European entities that sort of might have a clue. But I think there's more clue points in this room than probably over there. So I think, and it sounds like I might be raising this, it might be something that folks want to talk about tomorrow, but you've got a bit of an interesting challenge on your hand because there's two different octaves here in the room about what we want to think, and maybe you want to try and have two groups. I don't know, but I just read the room. That was my conclusion.
Yeah. So I'm gonna say a couple of things at this point in time. One thing is, and actually I'm gonna, because we have a limited amount of time and Neil is the only person in the queue who has not spoken yet, I'm actually gonna skip him one forward, Rudiger. I'm sorry, because I want to get as many voices as we can get in the time that we have, which is 14 minutes. So just to say though, to address the thing is that I think we just need to understand that there are multiple ways of a working group influencing whatever the influence might be. That might be a policy that someone proposes and we talk through and reach consensus on, as we have done. It might be that the working group turns around and says to the NCC, we need you at this meeting to raise this point. There are multiple ways of doing this, and I think that one of the things I'm hearing is a belief that the working group will go, no, right, we're just going to make everybody do this one particular thing in this particular way. And I think that, while we have, we definitely want to, the working groups do things, we think there's a lot of clue and a lot of usefulness there. We don't want to try and rule the world, and this is an important point to make. So, Neil, please.
Thank you, Brian. I'm Neil O'Reilly. I'm the RIPE Vice Chair. I'm wearing my hat. I think an important point, one of the first things I had to do as RIPE Chair was to study very carefully the policy development process. And there are two things that are important here. One is that the policy development process, at the beginning of the process, has to identify which is the best working group, the most appropriate working group to act as the vehicle for steering the process from the stage of a particular proposal to the declaration of consensus on a policy. And this is a case-by-case, first off, discovery of a working group and then steering of a process. So whether this working group actually ever ends up as the vehicle for a particular instance of the policy development process is something that will be decided on the occasion according to what's appropriate. So I think it's important, therefore, that the exclusion of this working group as a potential vehicle for the policy development process at this stage is inappropriate. That does not mean that this group will ever actually have to carry the burden, and especially the co-chairs of this working group at the time have to carry the burden of steering a process, of steering a policy development from proposal through to policy. Now, that's all I want to say with my hat on. I have two other remarks as just another community member. First, I would refer people to my silent lightning talk at RIPE 66. A key thing about consensus development is not to exclude by systematic blindness or by failure to communicate any significant stakeholder group, even if they don't seem to be in the room at the moment. One of the responsibilities, sorry, I should put my hat back on at this stage. One of the responsibilities of the working group chair, the working group co-chairs who are steering a policy through the process, a policy proposal through the process, is to make sure that nobody is left unheard who has a stake in the eventual decision. And that was the point of what I presented at RIPE 66. And finally, definitely with my hat off, I think perhaps the last bullet point could best be reworded as develop guidance to improve security. Whether it's policy, whether it's best practice, whatever will be decided case by case, but guidance might be a good neutral terminology to put in the bullet point. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm gonna actually ask the four of you who have spoken before a favor, as there is one voice who hasn't, and I would like, we've got to limit the time, but you haven't spoken on this particular matter, so I would, just want to.
And we're going to queue.
Alex Dioda from AMSIX. I'm also a board member of EuroISPA, which is a European association that lobbies in Brussels for the ISP industry. So people are present there, people that do have knowledge about the internet. RIPE is missing, so we don't see RIPE very often at the events. One of the things that is happening currently is e-evidence. Basically, every European police officer will be able to request data from any European company that has data. Being part of these discussions, I think, is valuable, but you need to have a point of view, things you want to defend. And my feeling with RIPE is that it takes a very long time to get consensus. So if you fix that, then you can be able to participate in the Brussels arena.
Sorry, I'm just making sure that no one's asking things online as well. So,
So Rüdiger Volk again, kind of Neil's suggestion for wording pleases me quite well. Nevertheless, let me remark, I was kind of annoyed seeing that the first thing that is suggested as being work is policies and only then best practices. Quite certainly, guidance, best practices, documentation, helpful stuff comes to mind. What kind of policies that are relevant in this context, which essentially means rules for the NCC to be applied in their processes, is kind of the last thing that comes to mind. And well, okay, the guidance suggestion from Neil is fine, and the EU level policies is quite certainly something that would need a completely different bullet point and explanation for contextualization, what that actually means. It's certainly not something that regularly happens in RIPE working groups and is called policy.
Peter Koch will return to the microphone because he felt misrepresented by Tobias quoting in terms of what I might have said. I had no reason and therefore did not say that the community had done a bad job in regulating itself. Quite to the contrary, it has done very well, and that's the reason that the RR system is flourishing in a way, and we are where we are. Hadn't the community done that self-regulation, we would have other people doing that by now. Now, what I did say was that our communication to communities that we haven't reached to yet, and I'm paraphrasing what I said, so bear with me that I don't quote myself literally, especially parts of the security community. And that's where I suggested we focus on the dialogue and also on the explanation of what this community is and what an RAR is and so on and so forth, and what the opportunities, but also what the responsibilities are. That's the important part. On the DSA, well, I guess there's been a presentation that I missed earlier in the working group, but bear with me. First of all, as Alex said, there are lots of industry representatives in Brussels. Yeah, the NCC could be more there, but then take it back to the membership for the willingness to pay for that, which actually I think they should, like we should. But in a room full of mere conduit intermediaries, that scenario that was painted is more or less irrelevant. We shouldn't mix platform regulation with what's going on here, and the rest we can happily take to the bar or somebody else. But that has nothing to do with the security as you describe it there. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry for misrepresenting that in this case, if that's what happened. No worries. So I think we have to agree to disagree. I agree that the community has regulated itself in a lot of places very, very well, and it has not done a really good job in other places. And I think anti-abuse and in the security, maybe the security is better than the anti-abuse, but I think the community has not made a good job in a lot of places. And I think to understand, because this is a common misconception, just so it's not going to spreading here, the DSA is not only about platforms. Paragraph 14 explicitly talks about ISPs and hosting providers of all sizes, not platforms at all. So just to be, because I think this is a common way on how people think, oh yeah, it's not for us because it's platform. They're talking about Meta and Google. It's not. They have paragraphs in there that are for the people that are in this room and the companies they represent. Please.
Jim Reid, just another random punter off the street. Several comments to make here. First of all, I don't like the idea of talking of a right security working group, because the word security is so nebulous. It can mean too many things to too many different people. So if we focus here on dealing with anti-abuse type activities, then fine. But security encompasses a number of things in the IT arena, which probably won't ever crop up or be used in this potential new working group to be a rechartering working group. So I think a better title would be needed than that, than talking about security, because that's an all-encompassing term that can mean too many things to too many different people. In terms of the wording you've got for these bullet points, I'm kind of worried about that too. Simple terms is there are far too many commas. You've got too many lists. You've got too many things which are being prescriptive. Whereas if you choose a little bit more carefully some more generic language, like for example what Neil was saying before about providing advice rather than best policies, best practices and all that kind of stuff. So if you choose much more careful selection of words, that would actually be a better choice than trying to enumerate all the things that you think this new working group might or might not work on. So I think that's another important point to take on board. I would also say there's probably a bullet point missing from this, which is advising the NCC. And I would go back to that when we were setting up the IoT working group several years ago. One of the main motivations for that was because the NCC's government engagement people were being asked, what is the NCC doing? What is the right community doing about IoT? And there was nothing. And the NCC wanted to have some kind of mechanism in place to get community involvement where the community could give advice or statements to the NCC that the NCC could either represent in these other fora or say this is what the right community is thinking or this is what the right community is developing. So I think that should be another aspect for the work for this new rechartering thing to consider is what do we want the NCC to be able to do when they go and sit down in a meeting with government officials or regulators or take part in discussions in the commission about what will be in the next directives that are coming along. I think that also has to be a key point of whatever this new working group is going to be in the future. So those are my suggestions. I think a lot of the text that's in there could be condensed quite a lot by just ripping out all these enumerated lists and having a simpler, clearer language, but with not getting into specifics. Thank you.
Okay. And this is going to be the last comment at this point in time.
Thank you. Malcolm Hutty, London Internet Exchange. Like some of the people in this room, although not all of them, I have put some considerable time in taking community norms and practices and standards and policies to regulators and saying, you've passed this broadly stated, rather unclear legal requirement. What does it mean? Oh, by the way, we think it ought to mean this. I'd like to thank Alistair at the back of the room there for uncovering that your ambition is actually to produce the policies that could be that. I am not opposed in principle to that being the objective of this working group. However, if you wish to do that, the bar in reaching the standard.
Excuse me, could you use the mic, please?
Please speak into the microphone, please, Malcolm.
The point that was made by the right Vice Chair earlier about making sure that everybody that ought to be heard has been heard, including the people not in the room, in order to establish something that is got any chance of being successful there, either in terms of being a good thing to recommend or in terms of being accepted. The bar to reach in putting that everyone has been heard who ought to be heard, including the people not in the room, is extremely high. If you reach that bar, you have a very good basis to go and say, this is really for the whole community that is affected by this, has had all the best brains on this, the most affected people. This is a very well understood thing across the people that actually do and practice this. You should indeed be interpreting this as the meaning of the broad legislative expectation, as I said, should mean this. However, if you do not reach that bar, it neither is likely to be, and worse, ought not to be accepted. And that is a very high bar to reach, which means that the scope of the work of the things that you put up as policies for that purpose really must be very tightly around the expertise and practical knowledge of the people in this community who actually show up, and not just a handful of random outsiders that pop in to say, let's do this, and it seems like a decent idea to us so far as we know, when it's really outside our practical working expertise. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'm going to say thank you. I'm going to say one final point on that, and thank you, Malcolm, is that please do not take it as there are three of us who are going to make all the policies, do all the things. This is a working group. We are merely the co-chairs. We serve at your pleasure. And obviously there is ideas that we have, and we have stated why we feel that this is necessary. We've taken, I'm finishing up and then we're going to move on, Malcolm. So
I'm not worried about you, Brian. I'm worried about the random guy that pops into this working group with a brilliant idea and that nobody here knows enough to say no, or is prepared to like stand up and say, actually, this really isn't for us.
So, and that is absolutely a thing. But again, sorry, you were using the word you while speaking to us a lot. So this was why I wanted to make that clarification. And again, that is why we have the PDP. That is why we have various things there. But look, this has been, I think, very useful feedback that we need to go and think about and come back in a nicely structured way on the mailing list, because that is where we will be. And we will continue. And to any of you who are worried, by the way, we have been speaking extensively to Miriam and Neil about this, and we'll continue to do so as well, because we are part of a community. So with that in mind, I think we just have, and I just want to say, by the way, actually, just on because again, a lot of different things in there, the education and training. Gerardo told me this morning that roughly 100 people have taken the anti-abuse, the abuse desk training. There are more planned for this year. Initial responses seem to be quite positive. So again, thank you to all of you who worked on that and helped us with that as a very concrete output of the working group. Is there any other business? Seeing nothing, I will remind you that you can submit agenda items for our next working group session at any point in time. The mailing list, again, obviously there'll be more discussion about the potential rechartering or otherwise there. And please do talk to us for the rest of this week as well. The advantage of going first means we have more time to talk about things we want to talk about. And other than that, from a working group point of view, thank you to our stenos and scribes and the AV folks and Meet Echo and NC support staff. We'd have to shout a lot without them. So from the three of us, thank you very much, and we will see you in Prague, if not before. Thank you.